starting with Jordan Addison, or starting with Devonta Smith and going down to Jayden Reed. This is our 21 through 30. And this might be the biggest disparities here, especially when it comes to Brandon Ayuk, Jayden Reed, Xavier Worthy. This might George Pickens.
Well, it makes
Like,
sense, right? These players are in very, very
yeah,
fluid situations. Like, we really
yeah,
have no idea what's going to happen for a lot of these guys. I think Brandon Ayuk is in a pretty solid spot. Like, he was 23 in fantasy points per game in 2022, 16th in fantasy points per game in 2023. I know he struggled to start the year. He did kind of start to come on a little bit. He had a 147-yard performance in week 5, but I'm not willing to let 5 bad weeks kind of push me off of what I saw from Brandon Ayuk from a really long time, and that's he's a really good ball player. And I just find it hard to believe that Jawan Jennings, who wasn't breaking out before Brandon Ayuk got hurt and did a good job after, is all of a sudden gonna usurp him in this role. I don't know what they're going to do. They have too many mouths to feed for sure. Cliche alert, but with Ricky Pearsall and Jawan Jennings there, but I'm still comfortable with Brandon Ayuk being the lead dog in that passing game going into next year. But I could be very, very wrong here in about 3 months, just depending on, or maybe not 3 months, but as mini camp goes on, like we're gonna have to figure out news of like what are they gonna do with Jawan Jennings. What's going on, like what's going to happen with Debo, all these things can impact it greatly, but he's certainly a top 20 talent as he's shown before.
yeah. I mean, they got a deal done with them in the offseason, leading into the season before they traded him to the Steelers, and then that fell through or whatever. At least from what my recollection of the offseason with him. But so yeah, he and Ricky Pearsall, I think, are probably the safest two receivers in that system with Kyle
Agreed.
Shanahan. So, yeah, there's every possibility I have him far too low. In fact, looking at it right now, I probably should have him closer to, the lower 20s. 20 is a little bit rich for me. Because this is a team that's going to have to make some tough decisions if they're going to sign Brock Purdy to a long-term deal. Now, I could very well see the 49ers just saying, well, forget that. We'll just go out and get Sam Darnold or Kirk Cousins or somebody like that, and they'll be able to do 80% of what Brock Purdy can do, although Kirk Cousins might be a tough sell at this point. But yeah, there is some uncertainty there, but I would agree with you. I think Ayuk is a little bit safer than those other options, especially Debo Samuel. DJ Moore, to me, like the reason I have him so low is because of what I said about Rome Odunze. I kind of feel if I'm going to be higher on Rome Odunze, I can't be as high on DJ Moore. And I was super high on DJ Moore coming into this season because I thought, he's going to be the number one option, even though there's a lot of mouths to feed, cliche alert, in Chicago. I thought Rome Odunze wouldn't have necessarily the best season, and that turned out to be true. But DJ Moore didn't have the best season either. So there's just a lot of uncertainty with Chicago as well because, in my lifetime, they've always kind of messed up the coaching situation. So we'll see if they hire another Matt Eberflus. But another name on this list that I found interesting, Jayden Reed. I didn't think I would be higher on Jayden Reed than you. So why so low on Jayden Reed?
Gosh, let's see. Probably because he had 2 20-point games since week 4. Like, he just doesn't get used. He had 1 game over 7 targets all year. I'm done having Jayden Reed in the top 30 until he can prove to me that he's actually going to get on the field. He's going to draw targets because we love him as an explosive playmaker, but maybe he really is just a gadget. Like, I don't know. There's got to be a reason why Matt LaFleur isn't playing him. Regardless of whether there is or isn't, he's not getting on the field. He was only 61st in routes run, 73rd in route participation percentage. And it's all around ugly. His 60th in target share. It's just so ugly for Jayden Reed. And yeah, there's just not enough usage there. Matt LaFleur has to come to my house personally and tell me that he's going to be used more for me to move him up. I just can't see how he turns into a top 24 receiver next year.
Yeah, and looking at the numbers, I think I agree with you, because the snap share, I think, is the most alarming thing to me, because there are some weeks where he's in the 50%, 50th percent of snap share, so he's playing just a little bit over 50% of the snaps, and like you said, his route participation rate is a lot of weeks it's in the 60%, like in the 60s. So that's not great. And then you talk about and his close to the season too was just absolutely brutal. If you had him in the fantasy playoffs, I mean, weeks 15 and 16 were okay, 11 fantasy points, but 1.6 fantasy points in championship week against Minnesota in a really good matchup, because Minnesota was good against the run, not necessarily good against the pass. And we have to also talk about Jordan Love when we talk about Jayden Reed. How good is Jordan Love? I still don't know if I know. I think he's okay, but I still believe that this production that we've seen from Jordan Love is a result of the system that Matt LaFleur runs. Like, I think they're going to have, I mean, I guess they've already signed Jordan Love to a contract, which, you know, who I guess he's going to be just fine getting them to the playoffs and then getting booted in the first round. But outside of that, I don't see a ton of upside with Jordan Love like I saw maybe coming into the season, but I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just ever rotating. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. I don't really know. I know he's not consistent.
Yeah. And there all of a sudden you have a lot of weapons there too, you know. Romeo Doubs is okay. I know Christian Watson's dealt with injuries, but Tucker Kraft emerged this season. Talking about Jordan Love, I mean, 3,300 passing yards. I know he missed a couple games, 25 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, but in 2023, when he was 5th amongst quarterbacks in fantasy points per game, this year 16th amongst quarterbacks in fantasy points per game. So a bit of a drop off, and I that's kind of how I feel. You know, 16th is probably, when we get around to quarterbacks, is probably about where I'm going to have Jordan Love. And the last player is Xavier Worthy on here that we have a major disagreement with. So tell me why, and I guess I made the case for you for Jayden Reed, so I guess I'm going to have to lower him down my rankings, but I don't know. 36 seems a little bit too low, but
No,
I think 30. I think 30 is. This is why we have a composite. I think
if he's
30 is
never
fine.
going to be a valuable wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team, it doesn't even matter if I have him at 50. He's not valuable to your team.
Yeah.
And Mika Egbuka is going to be miles more valuable next year than Jayden Reed, and I'm willing to stake my reputation on that. Fantasy receipts. I'll clip this and send it to Fantasy Receipts myself. But Xavier Worthy, look, again, it's just I don't know what's going to happen next year. I do know that with Rashee Rice, he was not really a priority. Granted, they're at two. It's at an interesting point where these were Xavier Worthy's first games in the NFL before Rashee Rice exited with the injury in week 4. But he really struggled to be consistent. What I didn't like was his body control on the boundaries, his sideline knowledge. Like, it seemed like a lot of little things that were causing disconnects between Patrick Mahomes and Xavier Worthy, and they never really got that sorted out. In fact, they had to kind of turn him into a lower ADOT merchant. In fact, because in Pittsburgh, he had 79 receiving yards, 8 receptions. Player Profiler says 6 air yards. I know that's not right, but as someone who watched that whole game, there's a lot of screens. So 6 actually might not be that far off because there were multiple like -3 yard passes. But again, like if we're gonna get a gadget scheme merchant, I just don't think that's somebody who deserves to be in the top 24 receivers. If Rashee Rice were not a factor and they were building this offense around Xavier Worthy, I would say something different. And it's really just a schematic knock for the archetype of Xavier Worthy. And I don't necessarily project him to get leaps and bounds better going into next year. I can see like if he has a 10 touchdown year, he'll probably finish as like wide receiver 26, somewhere around there, like a Jordan Addison type year that may happen. And so that's where he's kind of at 30. And again, like he'll probably move up a couple of spots. There are some people I need to shuffle around as we had this discussion, but there's no reason for him not to be in the top 30. I think 30 might be on the lower side of things, and I'm okay with that for now, at least.
Yeah, just kind of looking at the usage. I hate to say this again, but I think I agree with you because starting in week 14 is when the usage really picked up, like at least in terms of him being on the field. Because in weeks 14 through 17, the lowest snap percentage was 81.9%. Outside of that, he didn't get into the 80s until week 14, and it didn't really. It did affect his targets, but he had some games where he had 8 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets. But then you just didn't have the difference between being on the field 80% of the time and 60% of the time is that very much lowers your chances of having a game where you have, I don't know, 2 targets and 0 receptions like he had against Tampa Bay in week 9, where he had -1 fantasy points. And I remember some of the Fantasy Pros guys when I was, I do some producing work for them, laughing about that and how comically bad of a fantasy performance that was. But he did finish the year strong, but you have to wonder, okay, are they going to re-sign Marquise Hollywood Brown? We know Rashee Rice is going to be back at some point. So could be potentially, again, I think I might be a touch high on Xavier Worthy. And it might be a nice tear down moment. Like if you could tear down to Jordan Addison, I don't really see much difference between Xavier Worthy and Jordan
Yeah,
Addison,
I
really.
like that.